Alrighty, welcome everyone. Thank you all for joining us live. Tonight we are learning the Fwashama to Miriam Bat Ratzel, as well as Lilu Nishmat Avram ben Chaim Yehuda and Yecheskel ben Rabbi Avram. So the topic that we are going to indulge tonight is a topic that's kind of very Kabbalistic, very spiritual, but at the same point in time, it's very relatable. And I'll preface it with an example. So, have you ever had a day where you wake up and there's no reason for it, but you're just in a bad mood? You're just like, sometimes you can pinpoint it. Oh, yeah, because X, Y, and Z happened, that's why I feel X, Y, and Z. But sometimes it has nothing to do with nothing, and you don't know why. Okay, and you could associate it with maybe a food or a sleep or things like that, but you can't really pinpoint it. Like, let's say it even wasn't a lack of sleep. It could be also the flip side. Like sometimes you start a day and you're in a great mood, and there's like sometimes you stop and be like, wait a minute, what's going on? Like, why do I feel the way that I feel? And this is for people that are more keen to their surroundings. I'm more keen to the way that they feel. This is actually a very common phenomena. And what we see in the physical world is also in the spiritual world. There are times when you start your day and you're like, you get a test, like a spiritual test, and you're like, wow, easy, you could pass it, even though it's a difficult test, you can pass it without any trouble. And then there are times where like a small, simple, easy test that you've passed so many times, you just fail. And the question is like, what's going on? So the people that live only in the physical realm, meaning that they don't see spirituality, they don't see God, they don't see religion, they don't see anything else like that, they chalk it up to coincidence or whatever it is that they could they could pinpoint it to. But as we know, there is a realm that is very real. In fact, it's more real than our realm, the spiritual realm. And that is something that has a tremendous effect on us, whether we see it or whether we don't, whether we feel it or whether we do not feel it. So the Kav HaYashar is what we're going through in the 11th chapter of the Kav HaYashar, something that he's going to be, speaking about. The Kav HaYashar begins that there are two pillars. There are two pillars that sustain us in our exile, right? We don't no longer live, even though we have the land of Israel, it's not run by the religious, it's not run by the rabbis, we don't have the Beis HaMikdash, we're still considered very much so in exile. But there's two sources of merit that causes us to kind of save us and sustain us in our exile. And that is, number one, the merit of the Torah, and number two, the merit of the Avos, the patriarchs. And the Kav HaYashar explains that there are, we live amongst the nations of the world, and it's no secret, it's no lie, everybody can see it, they want to do evil to us from today until tomorrow, like it's coming out more and more freely and more openly. So the HaKadosh Baruch Hu gave us these two powers that help us, sustain us, and protect us during this time. And the Kav HaYashar explains that we have to go and pray every single morning in the merit of Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, that HaKadosh Baruch Hu should go and save us. Now, there's very, very interesting in how and where he places this prayer. In fact, the Kav HaYashar brings down a prayer. I'm going to have to post it. We're going to bring the prayer down soon. But right after, in the morning, the first blessing that we say is Al Netilas Yadayim. Right after that, there's a prayer that we should be said. Now, why is it right after that the Kav HaYashar says we should say a prayer that will help us, sustain us, and save us from the nations of the world, both physically and spiritually? And he brings a Kabbalistic gematria in regards to how this correlates to this particular point in the prayer and in tefillah. The first blessing is Al Netilas Yadayim. That's the first blessing that we make in the morning. Baruch Atah Hashem Elokeinu melech haolam asher kiddushanu b'mitzvosav v'tzivanu Al Netilas Yadayim. Now, says the Kav HaYashar, so numerical value, the gematria, every letter, we're going to go through this very briefly. Every letter is associated with a number, right? So Aleph is 1, Beis is 2, Gimel is 3, so on and so forth. Once you get into the tens, it jumps by 10s to 20. So for example, once you hit the Yud, it's 10, then it's Chaf, it's 20, Lamed is 30, Mem is 40, Nun is 50, so on and so forth. Every letter is associated with another number. Think of it if you would say A is 1, B is 2, C is 3, so on and so forth. So, says the Kav HaYashar, you take the first letter of this bracha, which is a base, starts with Baruch. You take the last letter of this bracha, which is a mem, al netilas yadayim, ends with the mem. So you take a mem, mem is 40, base is 2, the numerical value is 42. The beginning and the end of this blessing is the numerical value of 42. 42, you divide that by 2 is 21. Now listen to what the Kav HaYashar says, something so beautiful. You take the Torah. We said that the merit of two things sustain us in our exile: the merit of the patriarchs and the merit of the Torah. You take the Torah. There are 5 books of the Torah, and each book starts with its own word, with its own letter. You take the first letter of each book, and you add up the total. So Genesis starts with Bereshis, which is the base, and that is the numerical value of 2. Shemos, Exodus, starts with a Vav, Ve'ela Shemos, that is 6. Then you have Vayikra, starts with Vayikra, Leviticus starts with Vayikra, and that is Vav, which is also a 6. So we have so far 2, 6, 6. And then we have Bamidbar, Numbers, which is also starts with a Vav, Vaydaber, it starts with. And then finally, we have Devarim, which starts with an Aleph, Ela Dvarim. So you take the numerical value of each letter in the first letter that in each of the books of the Torah. So Bereshis is a base, is a 2. Then you have a Vav, a 6, that's 8. Then you have another 6 and another 6 and another 1, which equals to a total of 21. Right, so you have 2, 6, 6, 6, and then 1 equals to 21. Now you take the letters, the first letters of each of the patriarchs. So you have Avram, that's an Aleph, that's 1. Then you have Yitzchak, it's Yud, that's 10, we're up to the 11. And then you have Yaakov, which is another Yud, and that is, that brings it up to 21. The 2 areas that sustain us is the Torah and our forefathers. You take the first letters of each of them, they equal to the numerical value of 21 and 21, which is 42, which is exactly the numerical value of the first and last letter of the first blessing that we make, which of Al Netilas Yadayim. Now, the Kav HaYashar, first of all, fascinating. There's going to be a lot more that we're going to delve into this, but this is just the beginning on how he associates and puts it into particularly this blessing. The blessing, I'm going to say it very quickly. I'll translate it, and then we'll go on to explain, break it down, and really, delve into this. So the blessing that you should say. So you should say, the Kav HaYashar says that because we need the power, there's a lot of nations, there's a lot of forces that are going against us. We need an extra protection, and hence it's very, very instrumental, very beneficial for us to say this blessing after we say the blessing of Al Netilas Yadayim. And the prayer is, Yehi Ratzon Milfanecha Hashem Elokeinu Elokei Aviseinu, Shetamud lanu schus Avram, Yitzchak, v'Yaakov, that the merit of Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov should stand by us. Lahatzil eisanu ve'esaranu b'kol pesha v'avan. They should save us and our children from any type of sin. Kedei lekayim mitzvahs teresecha kedesha, so that we will be able to, lekayim, which we are able to fulfill the mitzvos, the commandments of your Torah, blishu machshava zar, without any foreign thought. V'tar libinu lavdecha be'emes v'samim amen. And we should be able to purify our hearts to serve you with truth and innocence, amen. This is the blessing. Again, I'll post it for those that do want to, copy and say it. In short, this prayer is a prayer that we should say every morning after we make the blessing of Al Netilas Yadayim, and that is to give us that extra protection for the day, for any of the let's call it the spiritual forces that are there to harm us. Now, the Kav HaYashar says, don't think that this is something new. This is something that he found this text already in the time, dating to the time of Rashi. Meaning, this is not something that's new. This is something that's been around for a while. Now, goes the Kav HaYashar and explains, what's this concept? This concept is, if we could take a step back for a second, this concept is that we need additional help, right? We have, when we go about our day, when we start our day, we have our, besides our physical and besides our spiritual, we have our emotional, we have our intellectual, we have a lot of factors that are coming in. Then there is this outside force that is trying to get us to fall, to sin, right? We know it as the Yetzer Hara, we know it as the Satan, but however, we could really go into a little bit in a different angle on this. And now people can think, listen, I'll do my prayer. I don't need the extra help. Meaning, I'm okay with it, without it. So there is a Gemara. There's in the Talmud Yerushalmi. In Shabbos, there was an old man who used to say, "Do not trust yourself until you reach an old age," meaning that he believed that having attained an old age, sin is no longer going to tempt him. However, this is a contradiction to what our sages tell us, that the Chazal tell us that al tamin be'atzmacha, you shouldn't trust in yourself until the day of death. Until the day of death. So we see over here, there's two different factors. This old man is saying, you shouldn't trust yourself until you reach an old age. But once you reach an old age, you're okay. The sages said, no. You can't reach yourself until the day of death. Meaning, even in your old age, you can't trust yourself. You could still fall. You could still sin. You could still mess up. Now, he only said till old age. So the Sultan got permission to go and test him. And the Sultan came to him and appeared to him in a beautiful woman. And, trying to, get him to sin. And he entertained that fact. And like the second that he was getting closer, flirting kind of with a sin, he all of a sudden he realized what was going on, and he backs up, he runs away. He's like, what have I done? And he saw this elderly gentleman was like a well to do spiritually speaking person. And he felt very, very bad. And the Sultan saw how bad he felt. He said he felt so bad. He tested this righteous person, and he almost fell. He didn't fall, but he almost fell. The Sultan goes over to him and says, "Rabbi, don't be upset." He says, "It's the Sultan. I got permission to be able to go and test you, only because you shouldn't tamper with what the words of the sages said, that you should not trust yourself until the day of death." So he didn't fall, but the Sultan showed him that I can make you fall. Meaning that just because you're an old man doesn't mean that you're safe. Just because many of us feel like, oh, okay, I'm good in this area, like I won't fall in this area. You don't know that. You don't know that you're going to be good in that area. The sages teach us that a person should never, ever, ever say, "Oh, I'm okay." You always have to be on the defensive. You always have to be ready that you shouldn't fall into temptation. And this is the way that the evil inclination, works. It's not, people think that because I don't have a temptation or in a particular area, I'm okay with it. The Sultan switches around, constantly changing its face, changing its tactics, changing everything, and it can get you in so many different ways. And we don't want to, obviously we don't ask for any of these, tests, but we could see this in day-to-day life. You have, let's say, an executive or a business owner who unfortunately did a few illegal things, committed some fraud. This person going back, 20 years, that person will say, I will never do I would never do. And they would go and they would judge other people. Oh, I don't know how this person does it. But 20 years later, you fell into it. Because when you're looking at it, you're not in that situation. You're like, I would never fall, for something like this. I spoke to, a person who was unfortunately committed something very illegal. Actually went to prison for a little bit. When he explains it, he says, going into business, I would have never ever thought about doing this fraud, doing anything that's related to anything illegal. But what happens? You get, one thing leads to another, and just a little thing. Really, we can't judge anybody because you're not in that person's shoes. But a person can go from a place of thinking they would never ever do such a thing to falling into something very, 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 very severe. You look at politicians. Not every politician is corrupt, and even the corrupt politicians, when they went in, doesn't mean that they were going for corruption. It could be they wanted to make life better for the citizens. But one thing led to another, and things go in the way that the Sultan is able to go and manipulate things and puts people in a position that's very, very hard to overcome. And that's why the sage just says, don't trust yourself until the day of death. That just because you're good right now doesn't mean that you're going to continue to be good. The idea of old age and feeling that, oh, I'm good in this area can come. I want to speak about one of two different points. Number one is complacency. Complacency, it's kind of like a settled, like when people get older, they're more settled. So they feel that okay, like I'm good where I am. Less to work on. Let's call it. You could even call it spiritual laziness. In a way, meaning that they grew to a certain point and then they're like, okay, fine, I'm older, like they kind of put it to us, to not everybody obviously, but like a spiritual laziness. But there's another thing that happens with age, and that is pride increases, which is something very interesting. There's a greater focus for pride as a person gets older. Not a topic for today, but these are two things that happen when a person gets older. When you combine complacency, spiritual laziness with pride, that's a equation that is disastrous for spiritual growth. Because what happens is, complacency means like, I'm okay where I am. Pride means like, who is going to teach me? That person is going to teach me? I know more than that person, even though it can be furthest from the truth. But that's how, unfortunately, people think. So people get, and they put themselves in a situation, and I see this all the time, where you have somebody be like, I'm not going to go to this rabbi speech, or I'm not going to go and read this book. I'm not going to go and why? Because like, this person is not as smart as me. This person is younger than me. This person didn't. We have reasons, galore. We have tons and tons of reasons and excuses to say that. But what happens is that when you put these two equations together with complacency, spiritual laziness, and pride, then nobody can teach you. And there's something very interesting when we look at someone who is wise, who's smart, who is spiritually a spiritual giant. What do we call them in Hebrew? A Talmid Chacham. What's a Talmid Chacham? A Talmid Chacham means a student that is wise. First of all, why do you call it a student that is wise? You call it, a doctorate in Talmudic studies. There was a rabbi who got a job in, let's just call it a very, 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 very modern, community. And the board was going through his schedule, and there he was creating a schedule. And then he put from 10 in the morning till 12 in the afternoon, that's when I study. And this says, I can't see anybody, I'm not speaking to anybody, that's when I study. And the board members are looking at him and says, what do you mean study? He says, didn't you graduate already? Aren't you a rabbi? You're like, why are you studying it? Because in their mind, in the secular world, it's like once you become a doctor, you're going to look at journals, you're going to look at things like that, but you don't need to study anymore. That was when you were in college. That's when you were in school. You are no longer in school. What is the concept of like constantly learning, constantly studying? And that is the Talmid is a student. That someone who is wise is always a student. Always a student. And that's why the Mishnah in Pirkei Avos tells us, Ezu hachacham halomed mikol adam. Who is considered a wise person? Someone who learns from everyone. Don't think that someone's greater than you, or someone's lesser than you, rather, and you can't learn from that person. You can learn from every single person, and there is so much that we have the ability to learn. The problem is that sometimes we kind of like, oh no, this person doesn't know what they're talking about, and why should I go, and why should I like even indulge it? And this is something that happens to every single one of us. And I'll tell you that the aspect that I have to catch myself in. So let's say someone calls me up, has a question, advice, whatever it is, and sometimes they, in general, once you do it enough, you kind of, the first 2 minutes of the conversation, you kind of know. Some people are very, ambiguous, so it's very hard. But most people, if they're kind of clear, within the first 2 minutes what they're asking, and you've heard this before, and you know how to get through it. So the first thing that you do is you'd be like, okay, I get what you're saying, and let me get the answer, so we don't have to go through this long, unnecessary conversation that there's no need to it. And the truth of the matter is that if you and I'll tell you, let me take even a step back. I'll tell you a scenario that happened and how my mindset changed on these things. So there was one, I think I mentioned this before. There was once a teenage girl that called me up and had a question about a friendship thing, and it took me a good 5 minutes. I'm like, no, it can't be. Is she really spending 5 minutes now because of a high school drama thing? And what am I I don't know, speak to your mora, speak, do your, I'm it took me a long time, and I was about to say something, and then all of a sudden a thought popped in my head and be like, for this person, this is a real issue. This is something that is really like for me, it could be a trivial matter. For me, it's like I don't understand. Like you're gonna call someone and start speaking about that you lost a parking spot and you don't know what to do with your life and how you be like you could be like, what are you doing? But when you look at the other person's perspective, that is something that is a real issue for this person. This girl was going through something very, very real. I don't understand it. I don't get it. I don't agree with it, but that's irrelevant because that's a real issue. Just like somebody else can be calling and has a major marriage issue or partner, whatever it is, that's real for this person as well. And it took me a second to be like, oh no, let me take this, let me take this seriously. And what happens is, in life, let's say someone talks to you, you'd be like, oh yeah, this person is really, let's use a nice vernacular, lacking of any intelligence whatsoever. And we dismiss the person to oh no, but really, if you want to be wise, you have to be able to learn from every single person. How do you learn from every single person? You have to be able to listen to every single person. You have to be able to understand it. And there is lessons and powerful learning opportunities in every aspect of our life. Every aspect of our life. And many times, because we're so busy, because we're always all over the place, it's very hard to be able, and I fall for this all the time. I'm so busy, I can't. And every so often I have to stop myself and be and that's when it is the greatest lessons that you could learn in your life is from the most simplest things sometimes. But the problem is that we dismiss it because we think we're smarter, we think we're better, we think we're greater, and the truth of the matter is, even if we're missing out tremendous learning opportunities. And that is why a chacham, a wise person, is considered a Talmud chacham, someone who's a student, because someone who's a student is always learning. You want to be wise, you want to be smart, you want to be great, always be learning. You want to have a great marriage, you want to have a great business, you want to always be learning, always be growing, always be looking for opportunities to improve yourself. Because if you don't, you're going to be stagnant, and if you're stagnant, you're going to end up falling. And there was once a student that went over to his rabbi, and he had a family wedding. It was it wasn't questionable, it was a problematic wedding, tznius-wise, modesty-wise. And the rabbi goes over to him because he knew the family, and he says, I don't understand, there's going to be an issue with modesty, what are you going to do? How are you going to, they were just talking, and the student was no, don't worry about it, this is, I live with them all the time, these things don't affect me. And the rabbi looks wide-eyed. He says, it doesn't affect you. The rabbi says, I'm 80 years old. I've been studying Torah my entire life, blind in one eye, and I know if I go to that wedding, it would affect me. How is it that it doesn't affect you? Really, we are always in an area of where we feel confident sometimes, and we're no, the Satan can't get me. I can't learn anything from this person. There's nothing that I could fall in this. And that stubbornness, that arrogance is what can lead us to falling, can lead us to sin. If someone feels they are a perfect spouse in their marriage, then guess what? You're not improving yourself. If you're going to be looking, be what could I do better today to make it better for my wife? What could I do better today that I make it better for my husband? What can I do better today and for my employees or my employer? If we don't stop for a second and we don't think about it, there is no chance of success in growth, or there's no opportunity for growth, rather. The problem is that we kind of put ourselves in a level where we're okay with that. And that's the same thing with the Satan. The same thing that we feel, don't worry about it. These things won't affect me. This thing won't bother me. You're falling for your arrogance is what's going to cause you to fall. And this is what the sages tell us: don't trust yourself until the day of death. So when we're coming to this subject, and we hear that the nations of the world and the spiritual forces in the world that want to cause us to fall, don't think that you're above that. No, this is something that you have to take into consideration and pray on it, because it's very, very important, very, very powerful that we pray to HaKadosh Baruch Hu to help us, save us, and protect us. And the Kav HaYashar goes on to continue. that not only a person should pray to God for help on this with a broken heart, but also there's something very important he's going to go on, and this is the topic that we're going to go on till the end, and that is cleanliness, the importance of cleanliness. And the Kav HaYashar explains from a Kabbalistic concept called the Ma'aseh Markava, where we're going to go we're not going to go too much into into this. We spoke about this a little bit before, but the concept that when you have an angel spiritual realm, and if they are traveling into the physical realm, right, because they can travel back and forth, if they're traveling in the physical realm, once they go up back into the spiritual realm, they can't sing songs of praises to HaKadosh Baruch Hu until they immerse themselves 365 times in something that is called in English the river of fire, and then they have to immerse themselves 7 times in white fire. Again, Kabbalistic concepts, we're not going to get into that. All we need to know is that they need to purify themselves, meaning that once they come down into this world, where they're just simply in the proximity, in the vicinity of human beings, these supernal beings have to purify and sanctify themselves before they go and they offer praises to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So certainly human beings, where we live in this world, we have to go and purify ourselves and sanctify ourselves before we go and we pray to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, right? Because we're speaking about prayer over here. We're speaking about the concept that we should ask HaKadosh Baruch Hu to help and save us from these spiritual forces. So what is the primary form of purification? The primary form of purification is washing the hands. We know that this is something that's very important, and unfortunately, for some reason, it's such an easy thing, but it's something that slips away from many people. When a person goes out of the bathroom, they have to wash their hands. When a person cuts their nails, whether it's the nails of their feet, whether it's the nails of their hands, they have to wash their hands with a cup, 6 times, alternating. You're taking a haircut, you're touching any part of your body, you're letting blood going out of the cemetery. There's lists of things that bring impurities. They bring this, and we'll explain what that means. They bring the spiritual forces, and where does those spiritual forces they lie on? On their hands. And the Kav HaYashar says that whoever is careful about this will not swiftly come to sin. Now, I want to take a little bit of a detour just to show, because everything in the physical and the spiritual, they correspond, they correlate. I came across an article. This is, if anybody wants, you can look it up. The National Library of Medicine. This is under the National Center for Biotechnology Information. This is an article of hand washing. So anybody in the medical field knows that hand washing nowadays is very, very important. You have to make sure that you wash your hands. But this was not always the case. In the early 1800s, and obviously prior to that, they had little idea of the significance of hygiene, of washing their hands, and the mortality rate when somebody went into a hospital, meaning if someone was sick and they went and they got care in the hospital versus they got care in the home, the mortality rate, the percentage of people that died when they went into the hospital was 5 times greater than those that got care at home. So there was a Hungarian doctor by the name of Ignaz Semmelweis, if I'm pronouncing it correctly. He was working in Vienna in 1846, and he found something very interesting. He saw that women that were given birth in a doctor-run maternity ward were more likely, especially the babies, were more likely to have fever and die. And he compared it to where there was a midwife-run maternity where they didn't have such a high death rate. And he was trying to figure out, what's going on? Why is it in the doctor facility is so much a higher of a death rate than in the midwife facility? And he tried to go and study what's the differences that are going on. And he found that one of the main differences was that the doctor facility, they came in, they did an autopsy, and this was very common. They did an autopsy, then they went to give birth. Then they went back to the autopsy, and then they went back and forth in the midwife-run facility. There was no autopsies. So as a result of this doctor came in and imposed a new rule in his facility that you have to wash your hands with chlorine. And all of a sudden, the death rate in the maternity ward fell dramatically. However, his finding was very, very unpopular during this time, because this would imply that the doctor was responsible for a lot of death, and people don't like to be the cause of death, so they didn't really take this into into that much consideration. This again came up with a very famous, I believe she was a nurse, if I'm not mistaken, Florence Nightingale, and she made some sort of study that with the infections in the camp, and she realized also that you have to wash your hands. But again, this was also not widely accepted. It wasn't until very recently, in the 1980s, where there was foodborne outbreaks, and there was a lot of healthcare associated infections, and the CDC, the Centers for Disease Control, identified that hand hygiene is extremely important to prevent this infection. And that's when hand washing became very, very prominent, especially in the healthcare field. And then where it became kind of worldwide, when COVID-19 hit, and people all of a sudden started washing their hands because they knew that was one way that it transmitted the disease. So when we look at today, we know hand washing is very important. There's tons of bacteria on your hands. You don't see it, but there's a lot of impurities in your hand, and you want to make sure that you wash it and you don't pass it on or take it onto yourself. This whole hand washing thing, this physical cleansing, was actually motivated by religious reasons. And this is what I saw in this in this article. So this article called it the Macbeth effect, meaning that it was started based off religious reasons. We know that the first religion that emphasized on hand washing was Judaism. There was also in Greek mythology. There was also in Christian, later in Islamic religions, as well as in hand washing. But this particular article, I found it very fascinating that the first noted medical association with hand washing, they noted it to the Rambam, Maimonides. They quoted it as Moses ben Maimon in the year 1199. He began washing his hands after handling sick people, and he didn't want to transfer the disease. But again, this was not well received by all the other physicians, all the other in his peers. But we see over here that even in the physical sense, hand washing is very important, because there's a lot of there's a lot of stuff going on that you don't see it. Also, so too explains the Ramchal in Derech Hashem in the fourth part, that there are impure forces. It's not only the physical impurities, if we may call it that. There's also the physical, the spiritual counterpart. And the Ramchal explains that the impure forces, they were given the night, right? They had an option. Kadosh Baruch Hu, where would be the best place to give them? They needed to have power, because everything's Zeluma Zebar Lakem. Kadosh Baruch Hu created everything on equal standing. So where is the best place to give the impurities power? At night, because night people are sleeping, people are home, people are more safer. So the Ramchal explains that the impure forces were given the night, but they were only given the first half of the night, meaning until midnight they have the power, not 12 o'clock midnight, but the halachic midnight, which changes based on obviously the calculations. But in any case, says this is why, by the way, we say tikkun chatzot. We say chatzot is after midnight. That's when you go and you say certain prayers. But explains the Ramchal that the impurity that wanders the earth, and this time, again, impurities that we don't see, also spreads into man. Specifically, and one of the reasons is that it's at night and when the person is asleep, because the Gemara in Brachos tells us that sleep is 1/60th of death. And when you are... So what happens when a person goes to sleep? When a person goes to sleep, there's a part of his soul or her soul that goes up to heaven. So explains the Ramchal, we don't have, when our soul is fully in with us, we have a extra protection to fight off this spiritual negative forces. But once our part of our soul goes up into Shemaim, and that's what happens when we sleep, then the negative, the impure forces have the ability to penetrate and to go into us to a certain extent. And explains the Ramchal, where do these impure forces rest? They rest on our hands. They rest on the hands. And that's why the first act of purification, when we wake up in the morning, we wash our hands. This is something that's very important. It removes all this spiritual impurity. And again, we're not going to go into, we spoke about this before, we're not going to get into the reasons behind specifically water. Water is what purifies. Water is what we go into the a mikvah. It's not oil. It's not anything else. It's specifically water that goes and purifies it gets rid of these impurities, if I may. So, going back to the Kav HaYashar, that what happens is if a person is not careful about washing their hands, they will, inevitably they would commit sins. Now, it's hard for us to go and to associate it, but now that we have a very strong background in what's going on, and there's spiritual things, right? We all know that we spoke about this one, in dreams, that not to scare anybody, but if there's a certain, the Gemara in Bracha speaks about it, that if you do a certain, mixture, let's call it, you put it around your bed, you'll see in the morning, you'll wake up, you'll see these footprints of, specifically they look like chicken feet, whatever it is. We're not going to get into too much details. Why? Because that's when the Shindalids have the ability, the demonic forces have the ability to roam, and they are all over the place. That if a person, and the Gemara says that if a person has the ability to see what's in front of them, they would go crazy, and people have. There's certain things, again, the Gemara and Bracha says there's a certain thing you take. It has to do with a black cat, actually. It has to be with cooking, whatever it is. And you take the ashes, you put it in your eye. You're able to see things that you can't see in normal reality. And we know that this is for a fact, because we know we can't see radio waves. We can't see most of the of the waves. We don't see what there is so much that's going on out there. In the spiritual realm, the place surrounding us is full of spiritual forces. And these spiritual forces can harm us, can benefit us. It goes, both ways. But what happens is that at night, these spiritual impure forces, they grab onto specifically to our hands in that area. And if we don't wash our hands, we just allow this spiritual impure forces to kind of we gave them power over us in a certain sense. And that's why the Kav HaYashar says that if someone is not careful about washing their hands in the morning, they would inevitably commit sins, because these are these shells of impurity. They're lingering all in these places. And the Zohar HaKadosh says that whoever enters a bathroom, just enter a bathroom, and you come out, you shouldn't read Torah until you wash your hands. And why? It says because there is a certain spirit that is right after you go out of the bathroom, it goes specifically on a person's hands. And that's why people are very particular. They wash their hands outside the bathroom, not inside the bathroom. Again, that was in an outhouse. We're not going to get into all the details on this. The important aspect of the takeaway is that it is very, very important to make sure that you wash your hands. And the Kav HaYashar goes on and says this is especially important that you wash your hands before you pray. You're about to daven. It's so important to wash your hands. So I do it when, my kids, when we go to shul, we know right when we come in, we always wash our hands. And it's something that I see, and it's something that it's not, it's maybe I should speak up more about it. But you people just walk straight in. You're going to pray to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Wash your hands. It's not about if you're dirty or not dirty. You want to be spiritually pure, spiritually clean. We don't understand even the power of something so simple, something that may appear so insignificant can have such a tremendous effect. There was a wealthy man who didn't follow the mitzvahs, but he kept one thing. And the one thing that this guy kept was he was extremely, extremely strict and stringent to make sure that he would always wash his hands before he eats bread. One day, he's on a business trip, and he took himself enough water and food, for the journey. The problem was that he didn't calculate on how hot that day is going to be. And he ended up needing to finish all his water. And he became very hungry, and he needed to eat. The problem is that he didn't have any water to wash his hands. So he was going back and forth. I didn't know what to do. He was going to pass out. He needed to eat, but he didn't have water, and this is the only thing that he's careful about. So he's thinking, he says there was in about a half a parsa, call it, let's say 1,000 or a little bit over 1,000 feet, there was a place where he could get water. The problem is that area was full of people that are up to no good, let's just say. Robbers, bandits, people that nothing good comes out of going to that place. And he's going back and forth. Should I eat? Should I not eat? Should I go there? And he's like, I don't do anything. The only thing that I do is that I wash, I make sure I be very careful with washing my hands before I eat anything bread related. So Across, the town, there was the famous Rabbi Baruch Mimeshbish, and he was learning with his students, and all of a sudden he stops, he kind of like looks up, goes into the window, opens the window, looks up, and all of a sudden he says out loud, Baruch Dayan Hamas. And then he looks up again, and then he goes back down to continue learning. And the students were there. They were like, what? Like, what's going on? Like, Rabbi, what did you just, like, what? Baruch Dayan Hamas? Like, what's going on? So he told him, he says, there's a particular wealthy man. And they were like, yeah, everybody knew this wealthy man. He says, he's very... So, unfortunately, he passed away. And the rabbi explained to them. He says he went to a place and he got murdered by these these robbers that were in the area. But you should know that he went straight up to Gan Eden. He didn't even get judged for anything. He went straight up to Gan Eden. And because he died, Al Kiddush Hashem, because he didn't want to miss up on the opportunity to go and wash his hands. I'm not saying that a person should put themselves into danger because of this, but this is the way that the story goes. A short while after that, they found his body exactly how the rabbi went, and the rabbi explained it, and then they made him a massive funeral. Kabbalistically speaking, also, someone who is not careful in washing their hands, they get reincarnated in something in water or water related. And in fact, there was once a righteous person when he was younger by the name of Rav Yossi, and he did everything by the book, learning always, everything exactly. But one day he was traveling, and he couldn't find any water to wash his hands. And he was hungry, he was going back and forth, and the Sultan started, giving him good reasons, like, what, you don't need to wash your hands, you don't even have anything of it, and they started giving him different reasons that there's not a big deal. And he says, but I never sinned in my entire life, I'm going to sin now with not washing my hands, going back and forth. And he was hungry, he decided, he's going to eat without washing his hands. And he ate without washing his hands, and he waited for the lightning to strike. He waited for for God's wrath to come rain down from heaven, and nothing happened. He says, "Oh, okay, that's interesting." And one thing led to another, and he slowly lost his fear of heaven. He slowly lost his Yiras Shamayim. As Ben Azai says, a person should always run to do a minor mitzvah, because a mitzvah gereres mitzvah. A mitzvah brings another mitzvah, and a sin brings another sin. Meaning that once you do a mitzvah, a good deed, even if it's small, it will bring in lieu another, and you'll kind of have a ripple effect where you're going to go and you're going to be able to do another good deed. But if you do even a small sin, it leads you to another sin, to another sin, and to another sin. So what ended up happening with this Rav Yossi is that he fell from one thing to another, from a small sin to a bigger sin, to a bigger sin, to a major sin, to the point that he became a thief, and he ended up breaking all the laws in the Torah. And unfortunately, he died before he did any tshuva. And they sentence him in heaven that he has to come back into this world as a reincarnation, as a frog. And the tikkun, the rectification that would happen for this person, is that his son is going to have to come, take water. He's going to be in the vicinity of water because he's a frog. The son has to take water, drink it, make a blessing, and that's going to rectify his soul. So he gets reincarnated in a frog, and he's sitting over there in a pond over here, but still we're near his son. But the way that HaKadosh Baruch Hu works it out, that if someone needs to be in a certain area, HaKadosh Baruch Hu makes sure that the person goes into a certain area. So HaKadosh Baruch Hu made that this son is going to work for a very wealthy man. And this particular wealthy man was sick one time, and he decided that he's going to go into Tveria, to the hot springs of Tveria, and that's where he's going to go, and that's where he's going to, heal in the hot springs. And he brought, his associate, his assistant with him, and that was this person's, Rav Yossi's son. And this man goes into the hot springs. He comes out. He feels a lot better. And he says, I feel better. He goes into the system. I'm going to go take a walk. Why don't you come join me? So fine. They go on. They start strolling. And all of a sudden, the son gets so parched, like never before in his life. He gets so thirsty. So he can't even speak. And he sees a flowing river, a flowing pond, not far by. He goes and he runs towards this pond. And all of a sudden, his father, who's now reincarnated in a frog, sees him and he tries to yell at him. He's like, I can't believe it. My son made it over here. Here's my chance to have a tikkun. And he's so excited, so happy. And the son goes in. This frog is making so much noise over there. The son doesn't. All it comes out is croaks. And the son goes down. And before he even have a chance to make a blessing, he goes and he starts drinking. And the frog just stares. And the father just stares. He says, wait, what? He says, all this time, I needed you to make a blessing. And now what's going to happen? Fast forward, what ends up happening is this frog ends up dying, and then he comes reincarnated back and forth, until he gets rectification. Where did this story come into play? That many years later, the Baal Shem Tov is traveling with his students, and all of a sudden he sees a frog. He goes over to the frog, does a bunch of different, Kabbalistic, incantations, the Kabbalistic things, and after he finishes, the frog just instantly drops dead. And then Baal Shem Tov says over the story and says, this is what happened, this is the person, and I just went and gave it a tikkun and rectified it that he could go and move on in his journey in the spiritual realm. But we see over here the importance of washing our hands. That even as insignificant it is, there is a very, very big power and very, very big importance to making sure that we're washing our hands. But there's a further thing that we have to understand, and that is that our surroundings play a very significant role in our effect, meaning where you are, where you're located. Have you ever, and you could attest to this, have you ever had, you're sitting down in a room and all of a sudden someone walks into the room, and this person walks into the room, all of a sudden you're in a great mood. That this person, they're lively, they're a great person to be around, they're always happy though, and you're in a great mood. And then you have, the same scenario can play itself, in the opposite manner, where someone walks in and you're in a good mood and you're like, oh no, not this person. And not that you have anything against this person, it's just like this person's always negative, always brings everything down, meaning that a person can affect you even without saying anything, just by being in the vicinity. And Reb Chaim Kanievsky says, and this is a week's parsha, that we see that when Yaakov Avinu, when he was going and he was gathering all the stones, and he put all the stones around him, the Torah tells us that the stones were fighting. Oh, I want to be under the tzaddik's head. I want to be under the under Yaakov Avinu's head. And they fought until HaKadosh Baruch Hu meshed them kind of into one, and they all formed into one. Why? Why were they so who cares? Okay, why do you have to be by the tzaddik's head? And Reb Chaim Kanievsky explains that physical objects, by being used by a righteous person, it gets uplifted. There's something spiritual that infuses into that physical object that goes and raises its level. And in fact, there was once a person in Bnei Brak that had a $100 bill that they got from the stapler. And somebody offered him, says, I'm going to give you, he gave him a lot of money. Give me that $100 bill. I'll give you, thousands and thousands of dollars. And he says, okay, I don't want to just part with it. Let me go and let me speak to the Reb Chaim Kanievsky. He goes over to Reb Chaim Kanievsky, and he says, I have a $100 bill from the stapler. Someone's offered me a lot of money. Should I sell it? So the stapler, Reb Chaim Kanievsky quotes a Yerushalmi in Adarim that there was once a very wise person, and someone asked him, how did you get so smart? Where did you get this? How did you get so intelligent? Where did you get your wisdom from? So he said that I have a staff of Rabbi Meir. I have the staff at the time of Rabbi Meir. And Reb Chaim said from this story we learn that your person can receive tangible benefit from owning something that belongs to a tzaddik. There's something very important that if you own something that a righteous person owned. And that's why you have people that pay significant amount of money for a yarmulke of a certain righteous person, a pair of tzitzis from a certain righteous person, a pair of tefillin from a certain righteous person. It's not just a sentimental value. There is actually spiritual benefit that comes out of it. So explains the Kav HaYashar, going back to the Kav HaYashar, there is another practice that allows one's prayers to be readily accepted. And that is, you have to make sure you don't sit next to evil people. Because evil people, there's evil that surrounds them in the vicinity. And what's better is that's why you have to make sure you have a shachan tov, you have a good neighbor, you have a righteous person that you sit next to, especially when you go to the shul, you go to pray, you have to make sure that you sit next to someone who's righteous, because if you're sitting next to someone who's evil, that has an effect on your prayers, because every person, every object, they're spiritual forces. They're spiritual forces. That's why when you go to, let's say, for a cemetery, for a righteous person, it has a spiritual benefit to you. You go, obviously, vice versa. To a negative person, to an evil person, it will have a negative for you also. Every single, they'll call it like an aura, like a invisible shield that would affect you. Well, I guess it wouldn't be a shield, but invisible power force that would affect you. You're next to a righteous person, that's going to affect you. You're next to an evil person, that's going to affect you as well. And explains the Kav HaYashar that every time someone commits a sin, and they don't do repentance, they don't erase it, there is a destroying angel, we know, that is formed, that is created, that has power in that vicinity. And there was a the Kav HaYashar brings down from me, Shlidvachi, if I'm pronouncing it right, says over that if there would be people, men, that would travel to distant lands because they needed to make parnasa. They needed to they would hire themselves out, they would do business. But because they're away from their family, they're away from their wives, they end up unfortunately falling into sin. And once they end up falling into sin, that when they end up accumulating significant amount of money, guys, I don't know why the internet. I seem to have good power, so I don't know. I apologize for the in and out connection. But in any case, when this person went and hired himself out, went to a different far off country, and he was away from his family, unfortunately fell into sin. And when they came back and they were traveling back, many times everything that they gained they ended up losing, meaning that they ended up accumulating a lot of money, and then they would end up being hit by bandits, robbers, sickness, whatever it is, and they would lose all the money. And the rabbi explains that what happens is that if a person ends up falling into sin, wasting seed, falling into different sin, all these create very, very damaging angels, very, very damaging, and spiritual forces that have an effect, and you lose more than what you gain. And explains the Kav HaYashar something very fascinating, that when a person goes and does a sin, that area where they sinned, there is power in that area. Meaning that if, let's say, someone, there's an area where a person always learns, or a person always does mitzvahs, there's power in that, in that area. Meaning that, let's say you have an opportunity to buy a house, and you could either buy a house from a righteous person, and pay a little bit more of a premium, but more run down, or you could buy a house from a wicked person, that did a lot of sins, but at a really big discount. There is value for buying from a righteous person, but did a lot of mitzvahs in their house, because that house has a spiritual positive forces that are going through it, as opposed to the negative forces on the other hand. Now again, there's different things that we do when we buy a house, and that's why you're supposed to do Chanukah Sabai. Some people paint, so there's different things that a person should do when they purchase a new house for, again, one of these for one of these reasons. But in any case, the Zohar in Shemos brings down there was Reb Chia and Reb Yossi. They were traveling through the desert, and they were, as rabbis were doing when they were traveling, they were studying Torah. And they came and they saw a certain man in the distance, and they were discussing amongst themselves, should we join with this guy? Should we not join with this guy? Because again, you're traveling, you travel in a group, it's more safer. But what happens is if, let's say, you're traveling and one of the person is is a wicked person, it's better not to travel with that person, as we explained in the past hour. So they're going back and forth. So Reb Chia says maybe we shouldn't join him because maybe he's an evil person, maybe he's an idolater, forbidden to, it's better to stay away from. Rabbi Yossi replied, but maybe he's a righteous person, maybe we should, associate with him. So they decide they're going to wait, and this man caught up with them. And this man goes over to them and says, I'd like to walk with you guys, and I want to tell you that there's a road that you may be unaware of, but there's something that's very, very dangerous, and I don't want to withhold this information for you. So the rabbi's response is, oh, Baruch Hashem, thank you Hashem that we ended up waiting here for this person because now he saved us. He told us about a particular dangerous road that we didn't know. And the man said to him, he says, the reason why this road is particularly dangerous is that one time there was a righteous Kohen who was traveling in the company of someone who was, let's just say, not so righteous. And the not so righteous person, the ignoramus, went and in this particular road killed this, this Kohen. And every time you pass by the spot where he was murdered, there is a spiritual forces that can cause harm. And and he explained to them where it was. Why? Because of sin. The vicinity of where that sin was committed has a power to go and affect. So surely when we go and we pray, we have to make sure that we're next to righteous people, that we're next to a positive spiritual power, not a negative spiritual power. Now I want to end off with something that I really was like, I don't know, should I say it, should I not say it? Because this thing it needs a full class in itself, and I want to say it in like 5 minutes. But the reason why I decided that I am going to bring it up is because it shows you the importance of just how much the area can affect you. And it happens to be with this week's parasha. And this is from the Chidah. So when Leah was pregnant at the same time that Rachel was pregnant, Leah was pregnant and gave birth to Dinah, and Rachel was pregnant and gave birth to Yosef. But during this time when both of them were pregnant, Leah saw in Ruach HaKodesh that she was supposed to have a boy. And she made a very quick calculation. She says, wait a minute. If I am supposed to have a boy, that means that there's only that we would have completed 11 out of the 12 tribes. That means that Rachel will only have one boy, because there will be 11 boys already out of the 12 tribes. There will be 11 tribes already born. That means that her sister is only going to have one tribe out of the 12, and that's even less than the maidservants. And she started praying to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, don't let my sister have, only one tribe. And she prayed, and what happened is that miraculously they switched from what the boy that Leah was having went to Rachel, and the girl that Rachel was having went to Leah. Switched in middle, spiritually speaking, obviously. It switched in middle. So let's take that, put it in the back burner for a second, and let's it's actually rewinding. Rachel, we know that Reuben found dudaim, these plants that are very helpful for people to become pregnant, and Rachel goes over to Leah and says, "I see that your son got you dudaim. I don't have any children. Can you give me these dudaim, these plants that would go and be beneficial for to fertility, let's call it?" And Leah responded and says, "What? First you took my husband, now you want to take my dudaim also?" Now, if we stop the story right now, and again, we didn't go through the background because I'm saying it very quickly, but the way that it went down is Yaakov was supposed to marry Rachel. However, Rachel saw that they were going to do the switcheroo with Leah, and that they were going to give Leah to be married instead of Rachel. So Rachel goes over to Leah and gives her a code, because Yaakov knew that something's going to happen over here. So he goes over to Rachel and he says, "Here's a code. I want this code so that when we go under the chuppah, when we get married, I'm going to ask you a question. You're going to give me the code, and that's how I know it's going to be you." And that is, what is a woman supposed to prepare before a Shabbos? Again, this is Erev Challah and candles. But in any case, we're not going to get into that details. But that is the code that he gave her. Now, the night before the wedding, all of a sudden, Rachel knows that Leah is going to be switched in her place, and Leah doesn't know the code, and she's going to be very embarrassed. And Rachel didn't want her to be embarrassed. So what happens is that Rachel goes over to Leah and says, "Listen," he says, "a woman before she gets married, you're supposed to know what happens on Shabbos. A person needs to do certain things," and she kind of gives her the code without her knowing that this is the code. So they come to the wedding, Yaakov, and now it's Leah, but they had the veil, couldn't see who it was. And Yaakov goes and says, he asked her the question for the code, which is, what is a woman supposed to be careful before Shabbos? And she's like, look at that. I was just speaking. She didn't say this out loud, but she was like, I was just speaking this to my sister. Like, what a coincidence. And she says, challah and candles and eruv, and she mentioned those things. Yaakov said, okay, I got the right one. And they end up getting married. Explains Reb Shimshon Pincus that this entire time, fast forward 20, 30, till end, Leah never knew that really it was Rachel that was supposed to marry was supposed to marry Yaakov and not Leah. Leah always thought that she was the one that was meant for Yaakov. Why did she think that she was the one? She was older. The way that it was supposed to be is that Yaakov was supposed to marry Rachel, and Leah was supposed to marry Esau. But what happened was that all of a sudden, that when Yaakov came, and he didn't have any money, Laban asked him, what's going on? Why don't you have any money? He says, it was stolen from me by Esau's grandson. Why was it stolen by Esau's grandson? Because I bought the Bechorah, I bought the firstborn. So Leah overhears it, says, wait a minute. He says, if Yaakov bought the firstborn, that means that he is the firstborn. That means that I am supposed to marry Yaakov and not Esau. And she was so happy. And she was crying all this time. That's why it says that her eyes were always red. It was always red. Why? Because she was always crying, I don't want to marry Esau. Esau is a wicked person. So now she sees, my prayers have been answered. In her mind, she thinks that she is supposed to marry Yaakov. And it was always, and then comes to the point in time that Leah has many children. Rachel has nothing. She has no children. And all of a sudden, Leah's child comes in with this fertility, vegetable that helps with fertility. So Rachel goes over to her and says, maybe you can help me. Maybe you could give me this fertility vegetable that will help me go and hopefully make me get pregnant. And Leah responds, says, you took my husband because I married my husband. And then you came along a little bit after that and married him. Now I have to share it. Now you want my dudaim also? What Rachel should have responded, be like, wait a minute, sister. He says, this man was supposed to be me. I gave it to you. I gave him the code. I told you everything about it. I gave it to you. But says because you didn't say a word. Rachel never told Leah that really she was the one that was supposed to marry Yaakov. And we think, and many of us heard this, we're like, that's unbelievable. That's amazing. Like, look at the Mama Rachel, look at the level of Mama Rachel. But we forget, about Leah? Leah was not some, low-level, matriarch. She never told Rachel the fact that what she did, which she saw in Ruach HaKodesh, that Leah was supposed to have the 11th tribe. And she's like, wait a minute, why is my sister not going to have, two tribes? She's only going to have one. She says, you know what? I'm going to give up my tribe. I want to give it to my sister. And they ended up switching. Dinah ended up switching with Yosef, says Achidah, in the womb. And HaKadosh Baruch Hu listened to her tefillah. Now, what happened to Dinah? So Leah gave up a tribe. One of the 12 tribes, she gave it up. And what happened? What was her reward? She had a girl, Dinah. What happened to Dinah? She ended up being raped by Shechem. That's her reward? She just gave up a tribe. And then she ends up she had a girl. She lost, a tribe. Not the girl's her, and you will soon see that it actually plays, double down, in the benefit. She lost a tribe. And the benefit was that she got a girl that ended up getting raped by this non-Jewish pervert. Like, that's the reward. So let's look at the story a little bit further. When Shechem, raped Dinah, they ended up having a girl, and the tribes wanted to send this girl out. So what Yaakov did is he wrote a camel. He put it on the necklace on this, on this little girl, and they sent her out, and she ended up going into Egypt, and she ended up being in the house of Potiphera, and her name was Osnas Bas Potiphera. And what happened to this girl Osnas? So years go by. Yosef goes out of prison, and he goes and becomes the viceroy, the second in command, and now he was the most eligible bachelor in the entire Egypt, the most powerful land. And the way that it would work is like, how would he decide who he wants to marry, who he wants to date? So he walked down the street, and girls would throw their jewelry, and whatever he would pick up, those are the ones that he would go out. So he's walking down, and girls are throwing their jewelry as is custom, and all of a sudden he goes down, and he sees a camel. There's a camel. What's it doing? He picks it up. He opens it up, and he says, "It's his father's handwriting." So he picks it up. He says, "Who is this?" And Osnas comes, and what ends up happening is they end up getting married. Yosef ends up marrying Dinah's daughter from Shechem. What happens? They have two children, Menashe and Ephraim, and we know the Torah tells us that Menashe and Ephraim became like tribes as well. So Leah gave up one tribe. Yes, there was some sort of hurt on the way where Dinah ended up having a situation with Shechem, and that ended up having with Osnas. But what happened ultimately? She ended up having two tribes, Menashe and Ephraim. Now, you would still think, but why did Dinah have to go through all that she went through. Again, we're going deep. This is a lecture in itself, and maybe we should give a lecture at one point on, a little more deeper on it. Dinah was a reincarnation of Amluslai. Amluslai was the mother of Avram Avinu. Avram Avinu prayed to HaKadosh Baruch Hu that his parents should also go into Gan Eden. But there was one issue that was holding back, and that is his mother was not careful in Nida. So the rectification was that the mother would come back down into this world in a particular situation where there's a nida issue, and that's what the rectification part of the rape came in, and that's why they had Dina. Dina is the same letters as nida if you mix it around, and that's why she came back to fix the mother of Avram Avinu. So we see over here, and the something very fascinating, besides how everything plugs in. Again, I'm going through it way too fast, because really, we could go through it, it's so beautiful when you go through it slow and you understand it, but there's something very, very particularly important that I want to emphasize. Yosef and Dinah, they switch rooms. And Yosef had a little bit of a feminine quality, and Dinah had a little bit of a masculine quality. We know that Dinah, the Torah tells us, that she went out. Why did she go out? Going out, meaning going out in the field, looking around. That's a man personality. Meaning men go out to work. It's a more of a masculine personality, and she had that. Yosef, on the flip side, had more of a feminine personality. The Torah tells us he was combing his hair. Now, what's going on? Why did Yosef have a more of a female, personality in a small sense, and Dinah had in a small sense, a masculine personality? What's going on over here? And explains the Chidah, because Dinah was in a womb that was by a man, and that area that affected, there was a manly area, and the spiritual it affected her. Yosef was in a womb where there was a woman, there was a girl there beforehand, and it affected, because they switched in the middle because of the prayer that Leah had, and that affected what it had. Yosef had a little bit of feministic quality because of that, and Leah had more of a masculinity quality because they were in the wombs, and just the vicinity helped it. But look how HaKadosh Baruch Hu works the world, that Yosef and Dinah, because the reason why Dinah went out was because of Yosef. Yosef was the one who had to go and help fix and complete the tikkun, and that's why he ended up marrying Osnas Bas Patifera. But again, there's a whole cycle, and we could review this 15 times, and it's just so beautiful. But the point is that the area, the vicinity, just sharing a womb of what there was before, whether there was a man or whether there was a woman, that has an effect on the baby and how it was on the personality. So Kav HaYashar, our areas, our vicinities affect us. There is spiritual forces in the world. There are spiritual powers in the world that we don't see it. But that just because we don't see it doesn't mean that it doesn't exist. We know we don't see our hands looking dirty, but we know that is that is the main reason of what is called a nosocomial infection, where infection of the hospital are transmitted because there's so much bacteria over there. And one of the main things, reasons that you're able to go and prevent bacteria, prevent infections, prevent diseases, is by just simply going and washing your hands. If you go and you realize that in the physical spectrum, so too in the spiritual spectrum as well. The spiritual spectrum, there's so much power that's going on. There's so much spiritual forces that are going on. What are we required to do, and what is important for us, is to make sure that we go and we remove these spiritual forces. And how do we do that? We go and we wash our hands. And specifically, that's why the Kav HaYashar, and that's how the Kav HaYashar begins, that when we go in, we come into the day. The first blessing that we make is Al Natilas Yadayim. We're removing the spiritual forces. Now you want to have protection, because we know that there's spiritual forces out there. Go and there's two areas where we go and we pray for protection from and merit of, and that is the Avos, and that is the Torah, and that is why we say that blessing specifically after we wash our hands. So the bracha that I have to give to every single one of us is that we should have the power, the ability to go and to make sure that we are not succumbed by these spiritual forces. We will be placed near positive spiritual forces, and that would help us achieve our success and prevent us from falling into any sin. And yes, we will say a kapitel Tehillim as we usually do for Klal Yisrael. This is chapter 30, as we usually do. Shir Malais Mima Makim Karsicha Adonai Adonai Shem Abikali Tiena Aznacha Kashuv Isakal Tachanunai Im avaynes tishmar ya adoinai mi amoid ki im chasicha leman divarei ki visi adonai gifs nafshi v'lidvarei achalti nafshi la adoinai mishamim la baiker shomim la baiker yachal Yisrael la adoinai ki madonai yachased v'arbeim meifadus v'hu yifteres Yisrael mikol avaynesav Achinu kol beis Yisrael anusunim batzaro v'ashiv yahim d'mein bayam uvein bayabasha hamakim yirachem aleim v'yatzim mitzara l'rvacham afel l'ara meshiba l'gula hashta b'agala bizman kariv v'neimar amen. Okay, looks like we don't have any questions. Thank you all for joining. Until next time, may you have an amazing, blessed week.